The Council of Fools, the Grand Assembly Hall, stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the vast chamber, their voices creating a symphony of anger and fear. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as delegates from dozens of worlds prepared for the most important vote in galactic history. Commander Vex of the Reptilian Dominion rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow across the lower tiers. His scales gleamed under the artificial lights as he approached the central podium. The hall fell silent, except for the soft hum of translation devices. "Fellow beings of the Galactic Union," Vex began, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. "We face a threat unlike any we have seen before. These creatures called humans spread across space like wildfire. In just 50 years, they have colonized more systems than most species manage in 5 centuries. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The crystalline beings from Sector 7 flashed angry red patterns across their translucent bodies. The gas entities swirled in tight, agitated spirals. Even the peaceful plant people rustled their leaves in distress. "They build their cities on dead worlds," Vex continued, his voice growing louder. "They mine asteroids to dust. They turn empty space into shipping lanes. Everywhere they go, they change things. They never stop moving, never stop growing." A delegate from the insect collective clicked her mandibles in frustration. "Our scouts report human vessels in sectors we claimed centuries ago. They ignore our territorial markers. They act as if the galaxy belongs to them, because they think it does," added General Pike from the warrior clans. His battle-scarred face showed nothing but contempt. "I have read their communications. They speak of manifest destiny and the human future among the stars. They believe they have the right to take whatever they want." The hall erupted in outraged voices. Species that had been enemies for generations found themselves united in their hatred of humanity. The ancient bird people screeched their war cries. The silicon-based life forms ground their mineral teeth. The energy beings pulsed with violent light, but in the back corner of the vast chamber, one figure remained silent. Kron of the Wanderers sat alone, his weathered face marked by countless years of travel between the stars. His people were older than most civilizations in the galaxy. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched species destroy themselves and others through pride and fear. Kron had also seen humans fight. "The solution is simple," General Pike declared, raising his weapon arm high. "We strike first. We strike hard. We show them that this galaxy belongs to those who have earned their place in it." The crowd roared its approval. Delegates leaped to their feet, waving appendages and projecting colors of war. The noise was deafening as thousands of beings demanded blood. Slowly, Kron stood up. His movement was barely noticed at first, but gradually, sections of the assembly began to quiet. The old wanderer's reputation was known throughout the galaxy. His people had explored more worlds than any other species. They had been neutral observers for millennia. "Honored delegates," Kron said, his voice somehow carrying across the massive space without amplification. "I must speak against this course of action." General Pike's scarred face twisted into a sneer. "The Ancient One wishes to share his wisdom? Tell us, Wanderer, what makes you think these human pests deserve mercy?" "Not mercy," Kron replied calmly. "Caution. I have encountered humans in battle. 20 years ago, during the border conflicts in the Outer Rim. What I saw there, ... double quotes, his old eyes distant with memory. What I saw should give us all pause." Commander Vex slithered closer to the podium. "You speak of small skirmishes, Old One. Border raids and piracy. We are discussing the full might of the Galactic Union. 47 species, 10,000 warships, the combined technology of 1,000,000 worlds. And they are one species," Kron said quietly. "One species that has been at war with itself for for its entire existence. One species that knows nothing but conflict and somehow thrives on it. The delegate from the crystal worlds flashed patterns of dismissal. We have studied their military. Primitive chemical rockets. Simple energy weapons. Their largest ships barely qualify as light cruisers by our standards. Their weapons are not what makes them dangerous, Kron tried to explain. During the border conflicts, I watched a single human pilot ram his fighter into one of our battle cruisers rather than eject. I saw human soldiers continue fighting with broken bones and missing limbs. They do not fight like rational beings. They fight like cornered animals. General Pike laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber. Then they will die like animals. Fear makes beings do desperate things, Wanderer. But desperation is not strength. You misunderstand, Kron said, his voice growing urgent. It was not fear that drove them. It was something else. Something they call duty, honor, love for their companions. I have traveled this galaxy for 800 years, and I have never seen anything like it. But his words fell on deaf ears. The younger delegates were already working themselves into a frenzy again. They wanted simple answers to a complex problem. They wanted to believe that superior numbers and technology would guarantee victory. Your time has passed. Ancient One, sneered a delegate from the Hive Worlds. You speak of honor and duty as if they matter in modern warfare. This is the age of efficiency. We will crush them quickly and move on. Commander Vex returned to the podium. The Wanderer speaks from the fears of old age. Yes, humans fight fiercely when cornered. All primitive species do. But they have never faced the united might of galactic civilization. They have never seen what true power looks like. The assembly erupted in cheers again. Delegates chanted for war in a dozen languages. The crystalline beings projected victory patterns. The gas entities formed into weapon shapes. The energy beings blazed with anticipation. Kron looked around the vast chamber and felt a deep sadness settle in his ancient heart. These beings had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten what war truly meant. They thought it was about numbers and technology. They thought it was a game with predictable rules. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. If you will not hear wisdom, Kron said, though few were listening anymore, then perhaps you will learn from experience. But I fear the price of that education will be higher than any of us can afford. The vote was called. Species after species cast their ballots for war. The tally was overwhelming. 46 votes for immediate military action against humanity. Only the Wanderers abstained. As the assembly celebrated their decision with lights and sounds and chemicals of joy. Kron sat alone in his corner. Around him, the galaxy's most powerful beings congratulated themselves on their coming victory. They spoke of quick campaigns and easy conquests. They planned victory parades and divided up human territory before the first shot had been fired. But Kron remembered the face of that human pilot, the one who chose to die rather than surrender. He remembered the determination in those strange, forward-facing eyes. The absolute refusal to give up, even when giving up was the only logical choice. The old Wanderer closed his eyes and began to compose a message to his people. They would need to find a place far from the coming storm. Because when the galaxy learned what humanity was truly capable of, nowhere would be safe. The war had been declared. But Kron feared they had not declared war on humanity. They had declared war on something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. Asterisk. The first strike 3 months had passed since the Grand Assembly's declaration of war. The massive Union fleet now hung in space like a dark cloud, 10,000 ships strong, approaching the outer edge of human territory. The vessels gleamed with the combined technologies of 46 civilizations, energy shields that could stop starlight, weapons that could crack planets, armor forged from materials harder than diamond. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance. humanity's flagship, watching the approaching armada through the viewing screen. Around him, his officers worked quietly at their stations. The contrast was stark. 800 human ships facing an enemy fleet more than 12 times their size. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Webb from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Union fleet. It's a surrender demand." Stone's weathered face remained calm. He had fought in 3 colonial wars and countless border skirmishes. He had seen humanity at its worst and its best. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life, showing Commander Vex's reptilian features. The alien scales had been polished to a mirror shine for this moment of expected triumph. "Human Admiral," Vex began, his translated voice dripping with contempt. "I am Commander Vex of the Galactic Union Fleet. You are outgunned, outnumbered, and facing technologies your primitive species cannot comprehend. I offer you one chance to surrender with dignity." Stone stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "And what are your terms?" "Submit to Union authority. Your species will be relocated to designated worlds under our protection. Your military will be disbanded. Your expansion into space will cease immediately. You have 1 hour to comply." The bridge fell silent. Every human officer waited for their admiral's response. In the distance, the Union fleet continued its steady approach, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Stone's reply was simple: "Come and take it." The transmission ended. Vex's image disappeared, replaced by the view of the approaching enemy fleet. For a moment, nobody on the human bridge spoke. "Sir," whispered the young tactical officer, "they have us outnumbered 12 to 1. Stone turned to face his crew. These were men and women from dozens of human worlds. Soldiers and civilians who had volunteered to stand against impossible odds. "Has anyone here ever heard of the Battle of Thermopylae?" A few officers nodded. Most looked confused. 300 Spartans held off an army of hundreds of thousands, Stone explained. They knew they would die. They went anyway. Not because they thought they could win, but because someone had to make a stand. He looked around the bridge, meeting each person's eyes. "Today, we are those Spartans. But we have one advantage they didn't. We're not just fighting for honor or glory. We're fighting for our families, for our children, for the right to exist as free human beings." The first battle began an hour later at Colony Base 7, humanity's outermost settlement. The Union fleet approached in perfect formation, their ships moving like a well-choreographed dance. They had fought hundreds of campaigns across the galaxy. They knew exactly how this would proceed. The human defenders were supposed to form defensive lines. They were supposed to fight ship-to-ship duels, according to the accepted rules of galactic warfare. They were supposed to retreat when their losses became too heavy. Instead, they did something completely unexpected. Captain Hill watched from the bridge of his Union cruiser as a small human fighter broke formation and flew directly at his ship. "What is that pilot doing?" he asked his tactical officer. "Unknown, sir. He's not firing weapons. He's just accelerating toward us." Double quotes. The human fighter slammed into Hill's shields at maximum velocity. The impact barely scratched the Union vessel's armor, but the explosion lit up space like a small star. Hill stared at the debris field in shock. "He rammed us," the tactical officer whispered. "He actually rammed us." Before Hill could respond, 3 more human fighters broke formation and dove toward other Union ships. They ignored the defensive fire completely. They had only one goal: to hit their targets as hard as possible. "These humans are insane," breathed the navigation officer. But Hill was beginning to understand something more disturbing. "No," he said slowly. "They're desperate. And desperate beings don't follow rules." The battle continued for 6 hours. The Union fleet had expected a quick victory, followed by surrender negotiations. Instead, They found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave rationally. Human ships that should have retreated instead charged forward. Pilots who should have ejected when their vessels were crippled stayed at their controls, trying to ram enemy ships. Damaged human vessels didn't surrender. They exploded their own reactors next to Union ships, taking their enemies with them. Commander Drake of the human destroyer, Swift watched as his ship's hull breached in 3 places. His crew was down to half strength. His weapons were offline. Standard military doctrine said he should surrender or withdraw. Instead, he ordered his helmsman to plot a collision course with the nearest Union battleship. "Sir," the helmsman said, "that's a suicide run." Drake looked around his burning bridge at his remaining crew. Young men and women who had signed up to explore the stars, not to die in battle. But they were here anyway, and they were looking to him for orders. "We can't outfight them," Drake said calmly. "We can't outrun them. But we can make sure they remember us. Full power to engines. Let's give them something to think about." The Swift's final transmission was heard across both fleets. "Tell my wife I love her. Tell my children their father died free." The destroyer struck the Union battleship amidships, breaching its hull and crippling its main weapons. Both ships were destroyed in the explosion, but the Union vessel took 300 aliens with it. The Swift's crew numbered only 40-7 by the end of the battle. The Union fleet had achieved victory. Colony Base 7 was destroyed. The human defense fleet was scattered. But the cost had been enormous. General Pike stood in the command center of his flagship, staring at the casualty reports. He had expected to lose perhaps 50 ships in the entire human campaign. Instead, he had lost over 300 vessels in a single engagement. How is this possible? He demanded of his staff. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. Their technology is centuries behind ours. His chief tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, looked pale. "Sir, they didn't fight like any enemy we've encountered before. They showed no regard for their own lives. They seemed to prefer death to surrender. All species fight fiercely when cornered," Pike snapped. "This is basic military science." "No, sir," the tactical officer replied quietly. "I've studied the recordings. This wasn't fear or panic. This was something else. They were calm when they made their attack runs. They were making jokes on the radio as they died. One pilot was singing something called a battle hymn as his ship exploded." Pike turned back to the casualty reports. 300 ships lost. 8,000 alien lives. All to destroy a single human outpost defended by less than 100 vessels. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving messages from several member species. They're asking about the high casualty rates. Some are requesting clarification of our mission objectives." Pike's scaled fist clenched. This was supposed to be easy. This was supposed to prove the Union's power to any species that might challenge their authority. Instead, they had suffered the highest single battle losses in Union history. "Send a message to Union High Command," he ordered. "Tell them we have achieved victory at Colony Base 7. Tell them human resistance was more determined than expected." But as he gave the order, Pike found himself thinking about the human pilot who had sung as he died. What kind of beings did that? What kind of species faced certain death with songs on their lips? Across the galaxy, Kron received the battle reports in his small ship. The old wanderer read the casualty figures twice, making sure he understood them correctly. Then he activated his long-range communicator. "This is Kron of the Wanderers, broadcasting on all Union frequencies," he said into the microphone. "I have a message for the War Council. The battle at Colony Base 7 should serve as a warning. Humans do not fight like us. They do not surrender when logic dictates they should. They fight until death takes them." He paused, looking out at the stars through his ship's viewport. This was one small outpost. One minor engagement. If this is how they defend an unimportant colony, imagine how they will fight when you threaten their home worlds. But Kron knew his words would fall on deaf ears. The Union had achieved victory, and victory justified any cost. They would not listen to warnings about human nature until it was too late. Old Wanderer began plotting a course for the galaxy's outer rim. His people would need to be far away when the Union learned what humanity was truly capable of. The war had only just begun. Asterisk the warning ignored. The emergency session of the War Council convened in the depths of Union Central Station, far from the celebrating crowds in the outer rings. The victory at Colony Base 7 had been announced across the galaxy with great fanfare. But behind closed doors, the mood was far different. Kron stood before the assembled military leaders, his ancient form dwarfed by the massive chamber. Around him sat generals and admirals from dozens of species, their faces showing mixtures of confusion, anger, and growing concern. The casualty reports from the first battle lay scattered across the central table like accusations. 300 ships, General Pike said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. 300 ships lost to destroy one human outpost. Explain to me, Wanderer, how this represents anything other than complete tactical superiority. Kron's weathered eyes met the general's gaze without flinching. Because you are counting the wrong numbers, honored general. Yes, you destroyed Colony Base 7. Yes, you scattered the human defense fleet. But at what cost? You lost more ships in 6 hours than most campaigns see in 6 months. Asterisk. Commander Vex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His scaled hide still bore the scorch marks from the battle. A human fighter had exploded so close to his ship that the debris had breached his outer hull. The humans fought recklessly, without discipline. They wasted their lives for no strategic gain. Did they? Kron asked quietly. He activated a holographic display showing the battle statistics. Your fleet entered that engagement with overwhelming confidence. Your soldiers expected an easy victory. Now look at the reports from your own medical bays. How many of your warriors are requesting transfers to other duties? How many are asking questions about human capabilities? The chamber fell silent. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The truth was evident in their posture. The first battle had shaken the Union forces more than they wanted to admit. Admiral Gray of the Deep Fleet leaned forward. You speak as if losing 300 ships to destroy a minor human base represents some kind of human victory. That is illogical. It lost everything. We lost acceptable casualties. Kron turned to face the Admiral directly. Acceptable? You lost 8,000 trained warriors to kill 47 humans. By that ratio, conquering all of humanity would cost you your entire military. The humans cannot maintain such tactics, insisted General Pike. No species can sustain those casualty rates. They will be forced to fight conventionally or face extinction. But Kron was already shaking his head. You still do not understand. Let me show you something that might clarify matters. The holographic display shifted, showing archived footage from human history. Battles from their home world, recorded over centuries of conflict. The assembled aliens watched in growing horror as human armies fought through conditions that would have broken any other species. This is from something they call the First World War. Kron explained as images of trench warfare filled the air. Humans fighting other humans. Watch how they advance into machine gun fire. Watch how they hold positions under artillery bombardment. The footage showed human soldiers climbing out of trenches, walking steadily toward enemy positions, despite knowing that most would die before reaching their objectives. The alien delegates watched in stunned silence as wave after wave of humans fell, only to be replaced by more. This is madness, whispered the delegate from the Hive Worlds. This is Tuesday, Kron replied grimly. For humans, this is normal. They have a saying, Death before dishonor. To them, dying for a cause is preferable to living in shame. The display changed again, showing more recent conflicts. Humans fighting in space stations that were losing atmosphere. Soldiers holding positions even when their armor was breached and they were breathing vacuum. Civilians taking up arms to defend their homes against impossible odds. Look at their faces, Kron said softly. Do you see fear? Do you see despair? No, you see determination. They are not afraid to die. They are afraid of failing their comrades. Commander Vex slammed his fist on the table. Enough! You show us the actions of desperate primitives. We are the Galactic Union. We have conquered 1,000 worlds. We will not be intimidated by the death throes of a single species. Will you not? Kron asked. He gestured to the casualty reports. Then explain why your own tactical officers are recommending we reconsider our approach. Explain why the Crystal Worlds have requested additional time to reassess the strategic situation. Several delegates looked uncomfortable. The Crystal Worlds were known for their logical, calculating approach to warfare. If they were having doubts, it meant the human threat was being taken seriously. Admiral Gray stood up, his massive form casting shadows across the table. The Wanderer speaks from the fears of old age. Yes, the humans fight fiercely. All cornered animals do. But they are still just one species facing the combined might of 46 civilizations. Are they? Kron asked. I have been monitoring their communications since the battle. They are not acting like a species in its death throes. They are acting like a species preparing for a long war. He activated his personal communicator, playing intercepted human transmissions. The alien delegates listened to conversations between human military units, civilian leaders, and individual colonists. The first message was from a human admiral to his fleet. Colony Base 7 held for 6 hours against 12-1 odds. They bought us time to prepare our defenses. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. The second was from a civilian leader addressing Atelier. Crowd, the aliens think they can frighten us into submission. They have made a fundamental error. Humans do not submit. Humans adapt. The third message chilled the alien listeners to their cores. It was from a human child, perhaps 12 years old, speaking to her parents via long-range communication. Don't worry about me, Mom. If the aliens come here, I know what to do. Teacher showed us how to make bombs from farming chemicals. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. The idea of children preparing for war was incomprehensible to most galactic species. This is what you face, Kron said over the noise. Not just soldiers. Not just military leaders. An entire species that treats warfare as a natural part of existence. They teach their children to fight before they teach them to read. General Pike's voice cut through the chatter. Then we will simply have to kill them all. Genocide is regrettable, but if they cannot be reasoned with ... can you? Kron interrupted. Can you really commit genocide against 8 billion humans scattered across dozens of worlds? Do you have the ships? Do you have the will? Do you have the centuries it would take? The old wanderer pulled up strategic maps showing human territory. Look at their expansion pattern. Every world they colonize becomes a fortress. Every system they control becomes a supply base. They do not build cities. They build strongholds. They do not plant farms. They create supply depots. Admiral Gray studied the maps with growing unease. The human expansion did follow military lines rather than economic ones. Their colonies were positioned to support each other defensively. Their shipping routes were designed to be easily defended. They have been preparing for this war since before it started. Kron continued. Not preparing for a war with us specifically, but preparing for war in general. Because to humans, war is inevitable. Peace is merely the time between conflicts. The delegate from the peaceful assembly spoke for the first time. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "How do we fight an enemy that welcomes death?" "You do not," Kron said simply. "You find another way. You negotiate. You compromise. You accept that some species are not meant to be conquered." But General Pike was already shaking his head. "Unacceptable. The Union does not negotiate with primitives. We do not show weakness to species that refuse to acknowledge our authority. Then you will learn through experience what I am trying to teach you through wisdom." Kron replied sadly, "But I fear the lesson will cost more than any of us can afford." The debate continued for hours. Some delegates expressed doubts about the war's direction. Others demanded immediate escalation. The smaller species began to quietly discuss withdrawal from the conflict. But the major military powers remained committed to human destruction. When the final vote was called, the decision was the same as before: continue the war. But this time, the margin was narrower. Several species abstained. Others voted reluctantly. Only the most aggressive civilizations remained enthusiastic about the campaign. As the council session ended, Kron found himself approached by Admiral Gray. The massive alien's voice was troubled. "Wanderer," Gray said quietly, "speak honestly. Do you believe the humans can actually defeat the Union?" Kron considered the question carefully. "I believe the humans will never surrender. Whether they can win, that depends on how long the Union is willing to bleed for this conquest. And how long do you think that will be?" The old wanderer looked out through the station's viewing ports at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, humans were preparing for the next battle. They were building weapons, training soldiers, and steeling themselves for whatever came next. "Not long enough," Kron said finally. "The Union fights for dominance. Humans fight for survival. And beings fighting for survival are capable of things that civilized species cannot imagine." Admiral Gray walked away without another word. But Kron noticed that he was not heading toward the military planning center. Instead, he was walking toward the civilian communication arrays. Perhaps some of his words were finally being heard. The war would continue, but cracks were beginning to show in the Union's confidence. The question was whether those cracks would spread quickly enough to matter. Time would tell. And time, Kron suspected, was running out for everyone. Asterisk. When Humans Unite 6 months had passed since the War Council's decision to continue the campaign, the Union fleet had attacked 17 human colonies, reducing orbital stations to debris and bombarding settlements from space. They had captured 3 minor systems and destroyed countless human vessels. By every metric of civilized warfare, humanity should have been ready to surrender. Instead, something unprecedented was happening across human space. Dr. Webb stood in her converted laboratory on Research Station Alpha, watching her latest batch of missiles roll off the production line. 6 months ago, she had been studying cosmic radiation patterns. Now she was manufacturing weapons for the war effort, and her research station had become one of hundreds of hidden military factories scattered throughout human territory. Dr. Webb called her assistant Tom, a young man who had been studying theoretical physics before the war began. The latest shipment from Earth arrived. More reactor cores and targeting systems. Webb nodded, wiping grease from her hands. Around her, the laboratory hummed with activity. Scientists who had spent their lives pursuing knowledge were now focused on a single goal: building better ways to kill the enemy. "Any word from your family on Mars?" Tom asked quietly. "My daughter joined the Defense Corps last week," Webb replied. "She's 17. 6 months ago, she wanted to be a musician." She looked out through the station's viewport at the stars beyond. "Now she's learning to pilot attack fighters." It was the same story everywhere. The Union's attacks had not broken human resistance. They had unified it. Nations that had been enemies for centuries were sharing technology freely. Corporations were turning over their entire production capacity to the war effort. Civilians were volunteering for military service in numbers that strained training facilities. Captain Reed adjusted his helmet as he prepared to lead another raid against Union supply lines. His squadron consisted of converted mining ships, cargo haulers fitted with weapons, and civilian vessels that barely qualified as military craft. By Union standards, they were laughable. By human standards, they were perfect. "Phoenix Squadron, this is lead," Reed transmitted to his pilots. "Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to make the enemy bleed for every inch of space they take." His target was a Union supply convoy carrying ammunition and fuel to their forward bases. The convoy was protected by 6 military escorts, ships that individually outclassed anything in Reed's squadron. But Reed had advantages the Union didn't understand. His pilots knew these asteroid fields like their own backyards. They had been mining here for decades. Every rock, every gravity well, every sensor shadow was familiar territory. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported his sensor operator. 6 Union warships, 12 cargo vessels. They're following the standard shipping lane." Reed smiled grimly. The Union fleet moved in predictable patterns, following routes that made sense for efficient space travel. They had never learned to fight in the chaotic maze of human space. "All units, execute Plan Baker. Let's show them what miners can do." The attack began with a single cargo hauler, apparently damaged and drifting. The Union escort moved to investigate, following standard procedures. As they approached, the damaged ship suddenly came to life, launching a spread of mining charges that had been converted into explosives. The Union ship survived the blast, but their sensors were disrupted by the electromagnetic pulse. In that moment of blindness, Reed's squadron struck from 6 different directions. Mining ships emerged from asteroid shadows, their cargo holds filled with improvised missiles. Construction vessels used their industrial lasers to slice through Union armor. Even a civilian passenger liner joined the attack, its emergency shuttles converted into one-way ramming vehicles. The battle lasted only minutes. When it was over, 4 Union warships were destroyed and 2 were crippled. The supply convoy was completely eliminated. Reed's squadron had lost 3 vessels, but those ships had been evacuated before the battle began. "No human lives were lost. Phoenix Squadron to all units," Reed transmitted as they prepared to withdraw. "Another successful hunting trip. See you at the next one." But the real transformation was happening on Earth itself. President Chun stood before the United Nations Assembly, addressing representatives from every nation on the planet. 6 months ago, these same representatives had been arguing over trade disputes and territorial boundaries. Now they spoke with one voice. "The latest reports confirm what we already suspected," Chun announced. "The aliens are not interested in negotiation. They do not want to rule us. They want to eliminate us." The assembly hall was silent, except for the soft hum of translation devices. Every delegate understood the implications. "Therefore," Chun continued, "I am announcing the implementation of Protocol 7. All national boundaries are suspended for the duration of the war. All military forces are placed under unified command. All industrial capacity is dedicated to the war effort." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, the entire species was truly united. Within days, the transformation was visible from orbit. Factories that had produced consumer goods were retooled to manufacture weapons. Civilian shipping was converted to military transport. Agricultural facilities were expanded to feed the growing military forces. But the most dramatic change was in the human population itself. Maria Santos had been a teacher before the war began. Now she stood in front of a class of children ranging in age from 8 to 16. But she was not teaching mathematics or literature. "Today, we're going to learn about improvised explosives," she announced to her students. "Remember, these techniques are only to be used if the aliens invade our world. Under no circumstances are these weapons to be used against other humans. The children listened, with the serious attention that only comes from genuine necessity. They understood that their world had changed. They understood that their survival might depend on what they learned in this classroom. Miss Santos asked a 12-year-old girl, "What if the aliens try to capture us?" Maria's voice was gentle but firm. "Then you make sure they pay a price for it. Remember what we learned about the Underground Railroad? Sometimes the best way to fight is to disappear and strike when the enemy doesn't expect it." Similar scenes were playing out across human space. Children were learning skills that would have been unthinkable in peacetime. Adults were volunteering for military service regardless of age or background. Elderly citizens were contributing their knowledge and experience to the war effort. Dr. Kim, a 90-year-old historian, had become one of the war's most valuable strategic advisors. His knowledge of human military history was being used to develop tactics that confused and frustrated Union commanders. The aliens fight according to established patterns, he explained to a group of military planners. They assume we will do the same. But human warfare has always been about adaptation and innovation. We must show them things they have never seen before. One of his suggestions had resulted in the development of ghost fleets, unmanned ships that appeared on sensors but contained nothing but explosives and automated systems. Union forces would engage these phantom vessels, wasting ammunition and revealing their positions to human observers. Another tactic involved using civilian communications networks to spread false information. Union intelligence would intercept human transmissions describing military movements that were completely fictional, leading enemy forces into carefully prepared ambushes. But perhaps the most effective change was psychological. Admiral Stone received daily reports from across human space, and what he saw filled him with a mixture of pride and sadness. Humanity was becoming something it had never been before, a species entirely focused on war. "Sir," reported his aide, "the latest production figures from the industrial worlds. We're now manufacturing ships faster than we're losing them." Stone nodded, but his expression remained grim. "At what cost, Lieutenant?" "Half our population is now directly involved in military production. We're turning children into soldiers and scientists into weapons manufacturers." "Yes, sir." "But it's working. Union advance has stalled in 17 sectors. They're requesting reinforcements from their home fleets." That was the key indicator. The Union had expected a short campaign followed by human surrender. Instead, they were being forced to commit more and more resources to a war that showed no signs of ending. "Any word from diplomatic corps?" Stone asked. "Several Union species have approached us through neutral channels. They're asking about terms for ending the conflict." Stone's aide hesitated before continuing. "Sir, should we consider their offers?" The admiral looked out at the stars through his ship's viewport. Somewhere out there, human children were learning to make bombs. Elderly teachers were showing teenagers how to sabotage alien equipment. Entire worlds were being converted into military fortresses. "No," Stone said finally. "Not yet. The Union started this war because they thought we were weak. They need to learn that we are not something they can simply eliminate when it becomes convenient." He activated his communication system, sending a message that would be broadcast across human space. "To all human forces, this is Admiral Stone. 6 months ago, the aliens attacked us because they believed we would surrender quickly. They thought fear would break our will to fight. They were wrong. We are not just surviving their attacks, we are growing stronger. Every colony they destroy gives birth to 10 new resistance cells. Every ship they sink is replaced by 3 more. They wanted to teach us our place in the galaxy. Instead, they are learning what happens when you threaten humanity's children." The message was intercepted by Union intelligence and forwarded to their high command. General Pike read it 3 times before setting it aside. For the first time since the war began, he was starting to understand what Kron had been trying to tell them. Humans were not just fighting back. They were evolving. They were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, an entire species dedicated to warfare. And they were getting very good at it. The question that kept Pike awake at night was simple. How do you defeat an enemy that grows stronger every time you hurt them? He was beginning to suspect that the answer was, you don't. The galaxy remembers 2 years after the first Union attack on Colony Base 7. The war had transformed from a simple conquest into a nightmare that haunted every Union commander. What was supposed to be a quick demonstration of galactic power had become a grinding conflict that consumed resources and lives at an unprecedented rate. Admiral Gray stood in the ruins of what had once been the Union's forward command base in Sector 9. The facility had been completely destroyed 3 days ago by a human strike force that had somehow penetrated 50 light years behind Union lines without being detected. How many ships did they lose in the attack? Gray asked his aide. None, sir. They used some kind of stealth technology we've never encountered. Our sensors detected the explosions, but we never saw the attacking vessels. Gray nodded grimly. It was becoming a pattern. Human forces would strike without warning, cause massive damage, and disappear before Union reinforcements could respond. They fought like ghosts, appearing and vanishing at will. What's the current fleet status? He asked. His aide consulted his datapad with obvious reluctance. Sir, we've lost over 60% of our original force. 17 member species have withdrawn from the campaign. The remaining fleets are requesting immediate reinforcement or permission to withdraw to defensive positions. The numbers were staggering. The mighty Galactic Union, which had conquered 1,000 worlds, was being systematically destroyed by a single species that had been spacefaring for less than a century. And human losses? Unknown, sir. Our intelligence estimates suggest they're now fielding more ships than when the war began. That was the most disturbing development of all. Despite 2 years of constant warfare, humanity seemed to be growing stronger. Their industrial capacity had expanded exponentially. Their military technology was advancing at an impossible rate. Their tactics were becoming more sophisticated with each engagement. General Pike stood before the Emergency War Council, his once proud uniform now showing the wear of a losing campaign. Around him sat the representatives of only 23 species, less than half the original Union alliance. The situation is untenable, announced the delegate from the Crystal Worlds. Our losses exceed our ability to replace them. Our home fleets are being recalled to defend our core territories. The humans are not just resisting, added the representative from the Hive Worlds. They are advancing. They have captured 4 Union supply bases and established permanent military presence in sectors we have controlled for centuries. Pike slammed his fist on the table. We still outnumber them. We still have superior technology. But even as he spoke, he knew his words were hollow. The humans had proven that numbers and technology meant nothing against an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules of warfare. Perhaps, suggested Admiral Gray quietly, it is time to consider alternative approaches. You mean surrender? Pike's voice was filled with disgust. I mean negotiation. The Wanderer tried to warn us about human nature. Perhaps we should have listened. As if summoned by his words, Kron appeared on the council chamber's main screen. The old Wanderer was broadcasting from his ship in the Outer Rim, where he had retreated at the war's beginning. Honored delegates, Kron said, his ancient voice carrying clearly across the transmission. I understand you are experiencing difficulties with your human campaign. The chamber fell silent. None of the military leaders wanted to admit failure, but the evidence was overwhelming. I have been monitoring the conflict from a safe distance, Kron continued, and I have observed something remarkable. The humans are not just winning this war, they are changing because of it. They are becoming something the galaxy has never seen before. The screen shifted to show intercepted human communications. The delegates watched footage of human children, no more than 10 years old, successfully sabotaging Union equipment. They saw elderly humans teaching teenagers advanced military tactics. They witnessed entire civilian populations transforming into effective resistance networks. "This is what you have created," Kron said sadly. "You attacked a species that knew how to fight, and you forced them to become a species that lives to fight. Every human child now grows up expecting war. Every human adult considers military service a normal part of life." Delegate from the peaceful assembly spoke with a trembling voice. "How do we stop them? How do we end this war?" "You do not stop them," Kron replied. "You ask them to stop. But first, you must give them a reason to listen." At that moment, alarms began sounding throughout Union Central Station. The massive defensive platform shuddered as something struck its outer hull. "Sir," shouted a communications officer, "we have multiple contacts approaching the station." "Human ships, sir." "They're everywhere." On the viewing screens, the impossible became visible. A human fleet had somehow approached the most heavily defended position in Union space, completely undetected. Hundreds of ships surrounded the station, their weapons trained on the facility that housed the galactic government, but they were not firing. Instead, a single transmission came through on all frequencies. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly confident. "This is Commander Brooks of the Human Defense Force. We are here to deliver a message to the Galactic Union." The council chamber erupted in panicked voices. How had humans penetrated this far into Union space? How had they bypassed dozens of defensive fleets? How had they achieved complete tactical surprise? "We could have destroyed this station," Brooks continued. "We could have eliminated your entire government in a single strike. But we are not here for revenge. We are here to ensure that this war ends today." Admiral Gray found his voice first. "What are your terms?" "Unconditional withdrawal of all Union forces from human space. Recognition of human territorial sovereignty. Formal apology for unprovoked aggression. And guarantees that no Union member will ever again threaten human civilians." The terms were harsh, but not vindictive. The humans could have demanded tribute, territory, or subjugation. Instead, they simply wanted to be left alone. General Pike stood slowly, his face showing the weight of defeat. "And if we refuse?" Brooks' response was immediate and chilling. "Then you will discover what happens when humans stop fighting defensively and begin fighting for conquest. You have seen what we can do to protect our homes. You do not want to see what we can do to take yours." The threat was not empty. Around Union Central Station, human ships demonstrated capabilities that should have been impossible. Vessels appeared and disappeared as if they could bend space itself. Weapons fired with precision that exceeded Union sensor accuracy. The technological gap that had favored the Union at the war's beginning had been completely reversed. Kron's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Honored delegates, I have one final piece of information to share. The human fleet surrounding this station represents less than 5% of their current military capacity. Asterisk, the number hit the council like a physical blow. If this overwhelming force was only a small fraction of human strength, then the Union faced an enemy that had grown beyond their ability to comprehend. How is this possible?" whispered the delegate from the deep worlds. "Because," Kron explained, "you gave them 2 years to prepare for total war. You forced an entire species to focus all their creativity, all their intelligence, all their determination on a single goal: survival. And humans, as I tried to warn you, are very good at surviving." The vote for surrender was unanimous. Within hours, the Union fleet was withdrawing from human space. The withdrawal was conducted under human supervision, with escorts ensuring that no Union vessel deviated from the agreed-upon routes. Asterisk. But the real transformation was already spreading across the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly found themselves discussing these strange beings who had defeated the mighty Galactic Union. Trade routes shifted to avoid human space, not from fear of attack, but from respect for clearly marked boundaries. Kron's final broadcast reached every inhabited world in the galaxy. Let this be a lesson to all civilizations. Humanity is not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the smartest or the most advanced, but they possess something that makes them more dangerous than any other race we have encountered. The old wanderer's image appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds as he delivered his warning. When you attack one human, you attack them all. When you threaten their families, they will move planets to protect them. When you force them to choose between death and surrender, they will choose death every time. And they will make sure you pay the full price for that choice. The message became known as the Wanderer's Warning, and it spread to every corner of galactic civilization. New species joining the galactic community received it as part of their standard briefing. Military academies taught it as required reading. Diplomatic corps memorized it as essential knowledge. But perhaps the most important audience was the humans themselves. Commander Brooks stood on the bridge of his flagship as the human fleet departed Union space. Around him, his officers celebrated their unprecedented victory. But Brooks felt no joy, only profound sadness. "Sir," asked his tactical officer, "what are your orders for the fleet?" Brooks looked out at the stars, thinking of the human worlds that had been transformed by war. Children who would never know peace. Scientists who had become weapons designers. Teachers who now instructed students in the arts of warfare. "Take us home," he said quietly. "We have work to do. That work would take generations." Humanity had won the war, but at a cost that would reshape their entire civilization. They had become something new, a species that could never again be threatened with extinction, because they had proven they would rather die fighting than live in chains. The galaxy would remember the lesson, and humanity would ensure they never forgot it. Years later, when new conflicts arose in distant sectors, there was always the same solution. When diplomatic efforts failed and military force seemed inevitable, someone would always suggest the same approach: send a message to the humans. Ask them to mediate, because everyone had learned the same truth that Kron had tried to teach from the beginning. Humans were not conquerors or destroyers. They were protectors. And when they fought not for glory or gain, but for the simple right to exist as free beings. The galaxy was safer for their presence, and everyone knew better than to test their resolve again. The Wanderer's Warning had become galactic law. Do not attack humanity. They will not break. They will not surrender. They will fight with everything they have, and they will win. The stars themselves seemed to whisper the lesson across the void. Humanity, united, was unstoppable. Asterisk.